If you were in Southern California in 1942 and one of the handful of people who had television sets, you would possibly have been able to tune in your TV set about 1946 and see that logo on the air. That was the original broadcast station here in Southern California, W6XYZ, which was actually a ham radio frequency, I guess, assigned to what has evolved into now KTLA Channel 5. A gentleman who has been with the station almost since the inception is our guest today, Mr. Stan Chambers. Stan, welcome to Channel 6.
Rob, real pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
You started in December of 1947, and we'll talk about your career a little bit, but let's go back. You were a student at SC. World War II came along.
It was a great era.
Tell us about that transition from SC to the Navy, back to civilian life.
Well, you know, to be part of this tremendous invasion of the GIs when they got out of the service, that probably the greatest welfare bill in history was the GI Bill, and everyone got to go back to college, get the course they wanted. We didn't have SATs in those days. You just went down and you signed up. And I remember going over to USC, having not made up my mind what to do, and I thought I was going to go to law school. That made good sensible idea. When I got on campus, here was a line coming out of that law school, out the front of the building, around the building, all the way around, and it just stunned me. Because I'd promised myself that once I got out of the service, I'd never stand in another line again. So I said, okay, and walked through the campus and saw this little building, and it said KUSC-FM. I had no idea what FM meant, but that's got to be a broadcast station. Well, SC was the first university in the country to have its own station, and I was lucky to go in there and be one of the students and operated that for, gosh, about a year and a half, and it was wonderful. And one day, one of our feature shows, they said that a television station was adding to its programming. So I thought, isn't that interesting? I thought, wouldn't that be fun? So out of the blue, I got an idea of taking our little local campus magazine and taking the cover girl and the sports hero and the funny articles and putting a program together. I called KTLA up on the telephone, and I said, have an idea. And he said, well, come on by, let's talk about it. They liked the show, I did the show, and that was my introduction to television. Then they called me and said, would you like to go to work? So I started $1.25 an hour and time and a half for overtime, and been there ever since.
And that was in 1947. Now, you weren't just doing the news at that time. Like a lot of people in broadcasting, your duties were varied.
Everything. That was the fun part of it. I would help put the sets together. We'd go over to Paramount Studios and get the chairs and the tables and the bale of hay and all of the things we needed for the broadcast that night, and we'd build the set. And then I did a cooking show, and I put the coat back on, and I was the one that said, isn't that good? You know?
Right.
We did dog shows. I was in sales during the day, made all the sale calls, and it was just a great time, and everything was live. We had a few old coming attractions and those little features they used to see in the theaters, but no other programming.
You were part of Paramount Studios, so they sort of used you as an advertising ability, the studio, as a way to promote their pictures.
Yes, this was the thing, but in those years, everybody was very suspicious of television, and they would not give us any feature films from Paramount or from anybody. So our original feature films were all from Britain. They were the ones. We had no American films for a long time.
Now, we've seen news evolve to become hour, 2 hour, 3 hour blocks on many of the stations. You folks do your nightly news. You have a morning news show, as do most of the stations in Southern California. Back then, news was, 15 minutes, right?
And that was it. Nobody ever heard of it. How would you fill more than 15 minutes with the day's news? And of course, we had no film. We had no crews. What you had would be those pictures that would come across on the teletype, and you'd paste them up on a cardboard, and that was your visual.
Put a camera on a black and white picture, and that was
it.
President Truman said this today, and whatever it might be. The story that I guess launched live television, a sad story, a tragic story, took place early on in your career. A young girl fell into I guess it was an abandoned oil well, I want to say in the San Marino area.
A big, one of these water wells, remember, that they did for irrigation in the old days.
And this was one of the first live stories, and the guy on the scene for a lot of that was you.
Yeah, I was there with Bill Welch, the two of us. And Klaus Landsberg, who was our station manager, and he was the real genius of television, he always believed in getting his cameras out into the field, out of the studio. So these big lumbering studio cameras, we'd go to the local parades, we'd go to the local meetings, and so we had done that. And then when the word of the Kathy Fiscus rescue attempt started, Klaus watched it, heard about it, listened to the radio, and said, "We're going out there." And we went out there, and we were on the air for 27 hours straight, Bill Welch and I, and we had access to just about everything. There was no restrictions. We had the cameras close up, and we'd talk to the rescue workers, and they'd come up out of the hole that they'd been working in. They tried to have a big parallel hole going down so they could then reach her through the side.
Yeah.
And so there was always a climax. They tried, they didn't make it. They tried this, they didn't make it. And the thing that we, broadcasting that, had no idea that really anybody was watching, because they'd never watched before. So this was going on without our realizing that no longer were there just about 400 or 500 or 600. There probably would have been maybe 20,000 sets at that time, something. But everybody knew somebody who had a television set.
Right.
So they would go over and they'd visit there. They'd sleep on the floor at night. It just captivated the whole city.
Yeah.
And when the word was that she had died, it was just a terrible event.
Right.
Terrible event.
You know, that location there, even to this day, I was mentioning to you earlier, I have an aunt that lives in San Gabriel, and you know, taking her out to lunch, you drive by that spot and she'd say, "You know, that was the," and you go,
That's
"Yes,
right.
Aunt Mary, that's the spot." And most young people in Southern California unfortunately heard about that tragic story, and were given a stern warning by their parents to be careful when you're out.
And so many people have maintained that memory all these years because it was such an event that was so emotional. They were so wrapped up in that.
You mentioned you took the cameras out and did local things like parades. An event that really has become synonymous with KTLA is the local coverage of the Tournament of Roses parade. You folks started that, I believe, in 1955, and you were certainly a part of that pre-parade coverage, as you are to this day. How has the Rose Parade evolved in all these years?
Well, the thing about 1955 would have been the first color broadcast, and that just shook everybody. There weren't that many color sets out there, but we were doing it in color. And then we had started very basically years before with just a couple of cameras. And so I would guess we were probably broadcasting it in 48, 49, something like that. And then we added a few more cameras, and boy, the reaction was tremendous, even though it was all in black and white. And what we actually did one time, well, no, we did it probably 3 times. We would broadcast the parade, and of course the parade would go on. Then at a certain point, we'd tear down part of the equipment, go all the way down to the end of the parade, have a police escort over to the spot, and broadcast it again. Because we didn't have videotape, you see.
Now, of course, we see a tape delayed. See it again if the people that sleep in late on New Year's morning get to see it on.
You see it all day long.
On videotape. Well, technology has certainly been a part of the evolution of broadcasting here in Southern California. Talk a bit about that. You said no film in the early days, then eventually film cameras, black and white film, color film, videotape. Now we're back to live all the time, which has got its risks.
That's right. That's right. The evolution is just amazing because, you know, there's a feeling when you're doing a broadcast or when you're working on a show, you figure this is what we have. You don't think that, oh, someday we'll have this. You think, let's get that show on the air. Let's see how we can do. So a lot of our attention is focused on that present moment. So all of a sudden, a new camera shows up. Well, isn't that nice? And a different lens and this and that. And all of a sudden, small microphones show up. and all of this technology is evolving. And then when videotape showed up, that was the real dramatic thing. Because unlike film, videotape showed you the real thing. And it was almost like live. Film, you knew it was film. But this, you could do all these new things you could never do before videotape. So that really revolutionized everything.
We're going to come right back and talk about a specific piece of videotape that was synonymous with you and your career and a big news event here in California as well. We'll be right back after this. And that logo, a little bit more modern logo from KTLA Channel 5 when they got those new call letters and were assigned to Channel 5. And of course, the tower there on Mount Wilson, that was a technological breakthrough as well.
It really was. Again, Klaus Landsberg, he looked all over Southern California, where's the best place to put a signal so you could reach everybody. Because our mountain ranges will block the signals, and you have to have those high antennas sometimes. So we actually picked that out. We built our tower, and everybody else has their Mount Wilson tower.
Has followed along now and built next to you, but they're on Mount Wilson. We were talking about technology in the last segment and videotape and the evolution of that. Now today, almost every home in America not only has a computer, but also a video camera.
That's right.
A few years ago, an individual from the community brought you a piece of videotape back in 1991 of an event, a police altercation with a civilian. Brought you that videotape, handed it to you and said, here, do what you want to do with this. This may be interesting, and pick up the story there.
It was a complete shock. Because of so many people getting video cameras, a lot of people go out and shoot stories. And to this day, we'll buy a story from freelance cameramen. But this man had just bought his video camera. And there was this disturbance outside, and his wife woke him up when they got out and they got the camera. And what it was Rodney King, who was this motorist, followed by police, ordered him out. He would not get out. He was probably on something. And anyway, he just fought. And dozens of police were there, but he just would not give up. And so they got the beating. They have the whole Rodney King episode. Of course, they didn't have the pursuit. They didn't have the fact that he was hit with a taser twice and he still kept on coming, that he was acting. He was just a poor, beaten person was the image that the video gave. So when we saw it, we said, we've got to show this to the police department right away. Took it down there, showed it to them. They were, but police reactions, very stoic, but you could tell this was a very unusual thing that they were looking at. And so it was going on the air that night. So about an hour before airtime, we got a call from Chief Bob Vernon. It was under Chief Darrell Gates. He said, we have investigators out at the scene. We're going to get to the bottom of this and let the chips fall where they may. Well, it went on the air, and we have an association with CNN. CNN was really just starting, but they were all over the world. And one of the big events of the time, one of the many wars that we've had, was just ending. And so they took our video that we had on at, say, 10 o'clock our time. Within the hour, it was all over the world. And this was something new because, we didn't know that we could reach the whole world like that. And that's one of the first really impact piece of television news that happened. Well, you know what happened. The reaction was just incredible. And there were all kind of court cases, and it just went on and on and on, and that just focused everybody. Then, a year later, when the officers went to trial, people were able to see it, the cameras were in the courtroom, and all of them were really not guilty. There were some other minor charges. Well, that just triggered it, like that. And when I left the court out in Simi Valley and talked to the officers and the family, and everything had ended, in a up mode. By the time I had driven back to the station, there were pockets of rioting going on.
Right.
And I was in the helicopter that night for about, 4 or 5 hours straight, and every place we'd go, a new fire broke out, a new looting situation. It was just absolutely a terrible thing.
You mentioned the helicopter, and let's back up. KTLA was the first in Southern California with a helicopter with live cameras, again, live on the scene from the air.
That is correct. And it was really almost 10 years later before another station had a helicopter. But this was just a real breakthrough. John Silva was our chief engineer, who worked closely with Klaus Landsberg. we had at that time great competitions with our friends across the street at KTTV. And we'd all go out on the story, try to beat each other, that wonderful competition.
Yeah.
And Dad got the idea, why don't we just get a helicopter, put a camera in a helicopter? Well, in those days, the cameras were big, the cameras were heavy, the cables were bulky, everything. And he went ahead and secretly built this helicopter in a garage near the Burbank airport, and it took a year, and nobody knew anything about it until the day we brought it up and put it in the air.
Right.
And it could cover everything.
And you still have a helicopter. Your morning news shows us the traffic and the weather, and all day long it's available to cover news stories.
Yes, we cover everything.
You covered a news story a few years ago, which also was somewhat controversial in that an individual distraught, having personal problems, whatever, eventually committed suicide. This was an unfortunate situation, and it was a live broadcast.
Yeah.
There are risks to live TV.
A live camera is like a loaded gun. You've got to be very careful with it. You've got to realize what can happen. And in this particular case, he went up in one of the freeway overpasses and literally blocked all the overpasses, no cars anywhere in the downtown area. So it just tied up the freeway system, it tied this up and everything. And so the helicopter was up over the scene. And he was doing strange things up there, and police were gradually getting ready to move in, and all of a sudden, live on camera, he pulled a gun out and shot himself. Now, it's unheard of. You just, this couldn't be. And some stations with their cameras had a medium shot, some had a long shot, some had a close-up, because everybody was in the air at that time. And it caused, as you can imagine, a very emotional thing that should not have happened. Now, as you know, there are delays that you have now, but that live camera, you never know what's going to happen. And we have live cameras every place, and every time we're on the air, we have the fingers crossed, and we're ready to take action.
Right, right. You mentioned the Rodney King incident, and you chose that as the first chapter of your book about your history of broadcasting in California. That seemed to be a big event, or something that would grab the reader at least?
Well, it was such a huge event, because in the Rodney King you do see this video, and you know how powerful video is when there's like that, where you have police against one individual and fighting back and forth. And then, of course, because it is videotape, it's played over and over and over again. We're seeing the same thing coming from the war.
Yeah.
Videotape 10 times a day, the same pictures.
Right, right. Your book kind of traces your history of broadcasting in Southern California. I believe it's called Stan Chambers News at 10.
News at 10.
You're now working on, again, more technology, the audio version of your book.
Well, the thing that it just lends itself to that, because these things happen, and boom, you're in the middle of it. Well, with videotape now, I'm able to go back and say, well, let's run maybe a minute and a half of this major event of the Rodney King, or of the LA riots, or all of these different events that took place, even going back as far as the atom bomb test in the desert, and going back to these early events. So what we did, we read the book, we told the story, and then we've put in some actual broadcasts. Well, there was video at the time, of course,
right,
of the actual stories.
So the audio soundtrack of the on-the-scene location, whatever the event was that you were covering. Well, one group of individuals, and you alluded to them, well, Los Angeles Police Department. As Southern California has evolved, so has law enforcement. You obviously have to have an ongoing working relationship with what we have now come to call our first responders, the firefighters, the law enforcement folks. How has that changed in their relationship with the media over the years?
Well, the only thing that has changed is the media. Instead of 3 or 4 of us showing up now, 30 or 40 of us show up right now. So it's not really possible to have that close one-on-one relationship that we all had for over the years. So over the years, some of my best friends, as they say, are the fire and police, and to this day I'm very good friends with many, and they made a definite attempt to work together. We have certain rules. You can't do this, you can't do that, but you can do this. But, you know, through a chain of command of several thousand people, it doesn't always get down to the guy on the street. So on all of these events, there's always that tense moment. What can we do? What can't we do? But they've really made a good effort to work with us, especially city fire and police and sheriffs. But there is that problem of, excuse me, what do you do when you're in a situation and you can't have a camera around?
Right, and you still have to come back and tell the story, and your news director is saying, Stan, we need 2 minutes and 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Come up with something, and that's when Stan has to come up with something.
That's right.
Right.
And usually we will go along with what they're saying. If we can't do this, okay, that's fine.
Right, and obviously that's part of the job is learning how to work the system and work with the system
Right.
to get the product out, to get the story out. Hard to predict the future. What do you see as far as the future of news in Southern California, and where are we all headed in this business?
I think news is really now almost on a par with entertainment. People want to know what's going on, and the television camera shows what's going on. There is sometimes the mixture of entertainment and news, which you wonder years ago, would that be in a news broadcast? It wouldn't have been. But when you remember, original news broadcasts were just like you and I sitting here talking
Right.
and reading, and then we added a few pictures and we added a few more. And then this mixture of the visual and the audio has been a very powerful element. It is going to get even more so, because as you know, once a major story happens, everybody is all over it.
Right.
And they're broadcasting it, reporting it, and competing with each other to get the best they can. So we're going to see a lot of that. And the hour newscast is the standard.
Right.
2-hour newscast is right in the wings.
Right, and of course now we have 24-hour-a-day news channels with
24 hours.
CNN, The Pioneer, Fox News, probably MSNBC, CNBC. The alphabet soup continues to grow out there, I guess, as more and more people want to get in and share their message and their sponsor's message with the public. And I remember when I was in school in the 60s, and probably when you were at SC as well, they said, now you're going to be at the loss leader for your industry. You're not going to make any money for the company, but it's important that we do news. Now it's become a moneymaker, very competitive, and it's now part of the entertainment division in many stations.
Yeah, it's just amazing, and it's going to pardon me, get bigger.
We have seen Southern California grow. You've seen Los Angeles grow, and of course down here in Orange County, Orange Groves and a few tract houses in the 50s. Disneyland came along. More and more people are down here. You now are down here in one of our neighboring communities, Orange County. What do you think of Orange County now?
It's just incredible. And Orange County hardly existed when we started back in the 49 and 50.
We are coming up on the end of our segment here, Stan, and we want to thank you for joining us today. Many honors have come your way. They've named a building for you there at KTLA. You've also turned around and are now helping the journalists of the future. There's a journalism award in your name, and that's encouraging young people to get into this business. That's got to be very rewarding.
Very rewarding, and some real top people. One of our guys graduated from Harvard this year.
Excellent, excellent. We want to thank you for sharing some time with us. Continued good success. Living here in Orange County, that's great. And enjoying your work up there at KTLA Channel 5. I'm not going to ask you the R question because we never want to do that, but it's always a pleasure to have someone such as yourself join us, and we want to thank you for spending some time with us today.
Rob, it's a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Privileged to meet you, sir. Thanks for coming down.
Thank you so much.
Stan Chambers, certainly a pioneer in broadcasting here in Southern California, and we want to thank him for sharing some time with us. Watch for that audiobook. That'll be coming out in a few months, and that'll be a great addition to anybody's library, and certainly something to keep as a memoir of our Southern California area and how our television news has evolved over the years. We'll be coming back with more Leisure World today. Stay with us.